The following presentation is part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network.
This is Pete Fletzer, and welcome to Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. This week, we are joined by author Matthew W. Stover. Join us as we talk about his legendary novelization of Revenge of the Sith, his Star Wars journey, and explore the Shatterpoint concept. So strap yourselves in, relax, and enjoy this journey around the galaxy. Well, welcome to episode number 100 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletzer, and we are a part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network. Before we get started, I do want to just take 1 second to say thank you all so much for hanging out with us on this, our 100th episode of Around the Galaxy. Whether you've just discovered the show, or you've been with us along the way, or you've been following us on Twitter for a while, and this is the show that you decided to join us on, couldn't be happier to have you here with us. Thank you so much for hanging out. And we have a very, very special guest for you tonight. And I am very excited to bring him to you. But before we get started, there's, of course, the business part that you have to do. I have been doing this for so long now. I kind of just roll it out off the top of my tongue. But, we are a part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network, which means that we share a special space on the internet with a handful of really great content creators. On Wednesday nights, you get Beyond the Blast Doors Live, which is a weekly conversation about all things happening in Star Wars with David Amaladi and Scotty Jayru and Arzu Amin. On Thursdays, you get the Bombad Cast, and we're keeping that Revenge of the Sith theme going. This week they're going to hit us up with a very bizarre translation of Revenge of the Sith from I don't even know much about it. They showed me a clip of it and I don't even know what to think about it. Friday night, of course, you get Force Connect, our weekly live call-in show with Josh, myself, and Raven, and we'll be taking your calls and talking about Star Wars. And Mondays, you get the Holo Chronicles with the boys, Josh and Andy, talking about all things Star Wars collectibles. Follow us on Twitter at ATGcast. Keep up with us and all the Beyond the Blast Doors shows at beyondtheblastdoors.com. And hey, if you want to support us through Patreon, we wouldn't be opposed to that. For as little as $5 a month, you're going to support this show and all the shows on the Beyond the Blast Doors network. And you can find us there at patreon.com/Beyond the Blast Doors. I've been talking a lot before I bring in this guest. I've been going back and forth a little bit with him through social media, but I am so excited because this week we are privileged to bring you the best-selling author of what many people have said is the greatest Star Wars novel ever written, the story, the novelization of Revenge of the Sith. Many of my guests, when we get to that 10-question segment of the show, when I ask them what their favorite book is, so many say Revenge of the Sith, but he's also written a number of other Star Wars books. He created the character of Darth Tenebrous. He's written other novels. So without further ado, let me bring in Mr. Matthew Stover. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you?
I'm okay. You can hear me?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, all is well.
Excellent. We are two for two.
I'm used to Zoom meetings and finding myself unexpectedly muted.
Yes, they say that the official phrase of 2020 is "you're muted." You're muted. Well, great. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. As I said before, a lot of people are familiar with your work through Star Wars. Of course, you also have your Kane series of novels, but a lot of folks have talked about Revenge of the Sith as being their favorite novel. I do we'll get to it in our show here tonight, but we do a 10-question segment, and I always ask what your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book is, and a lot of people reference yours. So it's a real privilege and an honor to have you here with us tonight. But maybe let's start before the novel and maybe go back a little bit even further. And I imagine you were a Star Wars fan before you started writing your Star Wars novels. Tell me a little bit about your Star Wars experience before you started writing for this.
Well, to the best of my recollection, I saw the original Star Wars, now known as Episode 4,
right.
In June of 1977 in my hometown of Danville, Illinois. A kid I knew from school and church showed up at my door one Saturday afternoon on his bike. I was 15. He was, I don't know, 14, 13, something. And said, "Hey, have you heard about this movie Star Wars? It's playing at the Fisher Theater downtown. Do you want to check out the matinee?" And I had seen an ad for it on one of our late night local TV affiliates. And so I saw Luke and Leia swinging across the chasm in the Death Star, and I saw spaceships, and I saw Alec Guinness, and I thought, all right, I can watch this movie. And as you might imagine, at 15, without any prior knowledge of the story or the mythology, or I had a different experience than younger Star Wars fans do, because I had no idea what I was sitting down for, and I'm not sure exactly what language is acceptable on your show, but it blew my shit away.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people forget that there was literally nothing like that.
There was no promo for this at all. I mean, the ad I saw was on one of the late night creature feature shows out of a local UHF station in Terre Haute, I think. It was. I mean, there was no hype for this at all. Yeah. And I had no idea what I was getting into. We had never seen, in those days, this what was then blue screen technology. They now use green screens, but the blue screen technology, we had never seen that in a film, as far as I know. Anyway, it was the first I ever saw. My understanding is that this is something that Lucasfilm developed. Yeah, I don't know if that's true.
A lot of the technology used in the film, of course, was first used there.
And it was just friggin' amazing from the very first shot of Leia's Rebel cruiser, to the endless Imperial Star Destroyer. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. So I mean, how old did you say you were? You were about 13, 14?
15.
Yeah. Okay. And so did it inspire you to write, or were you already a science fiction fan, or what?
I already wanted to be a writer. I didn't have much success with it for decades. I was, in those days, I was trying to write mystery stories, detective stories. There was a monthly magazine that my mother subscribed to, Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. Okay, so it was a pulp style magazine that would have, like, I don't know, 15 or 20 mystery and detective and crime short stories every month. And they had a thing they called the Department of First Stories.
Okay.
So they encouraged people who had never been published elsewhere to send their work in there. And so I tried without success for many years. And I kind of gave it up. I got interested in the theater. Went to school to study acting and directing, and worked as a professional actor for a while in Chicago after college. But all the time I was trying to write my first science fiction novel, which is now in print as the first of the Acts of Cain, Heroes Die. I got into writing Star Wars because Bob Salvatore and Mike Stackpole collared me at a World Fantasy Convention because they had heard that Del Rey had approached me. Del Rey was my publisher for the Acts of Cain books. Yeah. And they were they had approached me about writing for the New Jedi Order,
Mm.
and I was disinclined to do it
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't that hit. I had read the only Star Wars books I had read were Splinter of the Mind's Eye
Right.
and the Brian Daley's Han Solo trilogy.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm not sure how many stories there are left to tell in that. And I'm not sure I want to work for somebody else. I kind of like telling my own stories.
Yeah.
And Bob and Mike basically grabbed me by the collar and said, "Are you insane?
When Star Wars
You will never
yes.
have a bigger audience."
Right.
And so I was like, well, all right, if you say so, I'll give it a shot.
And so your first Star Wars novel was that was the New Jedi Order Traitor, right?
That's correct.
And then you also wrote Shadows of Mindor, and your second book was Shatterpoint.
That's right.
I want to get to the Shatterpoint concept in a little bit because I love the way that comes around, but I definitely want to talk about that. But then you also wrote a short story called Equipment. Which part of the Star Wars universe, because you had mentioned that it feels like there wasn't many stories to tell, but you wrote now also in the Clone Wars and the New Republic era. Which one did you enjoy writing more for?
The most fun I actually had was Traitor.
Okay.
Because it was the 13th novel in the New Jedi Order. I'm not sure if it was 13th in actual publication. It was 13th on the schedule.
Okay.
And so basically all of the heavy lifting for that story had been done for me. All the exposition, all the character development, all, everything. The whole situation in the galaxy, I didn't have to spend any time at all filling in backstory. All I had to do was talk about the part that interested me, which was, what happens to Jason in captivity. And it was a lot of fun. It was also, I'm fairly certain, the last of my novels that I turned in before the deadline.
The last one that was
the last one that came in before the deadline. Right. Okay. Douglas Adams said, "I love deadlines. I particularly enjoy the whooshing sound they make as they whiz by."
Douglas Adams is one of my all-time favorites. This is a great quote. So that was your first one, and then so of course you were going to be on time for that, right? That's the one that
right. Well, also it was kind of an interior fill-in story in a much larger saga,
right?
And so it was really kind of crucial to get it in so that it would fit in the publication schedule in the right spot.
But which time zone did you, or not time zone, which era was it an enjoyable era for you or no? Because I've spoken to some who like
yes and no.
Yeah.
I would say as far as eras go, the Clone Wars worked for me better.
Okay.
Although Shatterpoint was a little bit of a challenge because I did not know exactly what they wanted for this book. They told me they wanted a Mace Windu novel. They wanted to kick off their Clone Wars books with a story featuring Mace, and I came up with a fairly detailed outline about Mace. An undercover mission to Nar Shaddaa, maybe.
Okay.
With the sort of standard cast of wisecracking swindlers and nifty droids and stuff like that. And I spent a good 3 or 4 months putting together this outline.
Right.
And I sent it in, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't like it." And I said, "Well, what are you looking for?" And the word I got back from LFL through my editor at Del Rey, Shelley Shapiro, was that they were looking for something more along the. They were looking for something more about the horrors of war.
Okay.
A little bit more of a serious story.
Mhm.
And they wanted something, they wanted me to think in terms of like All Quiet on the Western Front.
Okay.
And I thought, have you read All Quiet on the Western Front? Everybody dies.
Like Rogue One.
Everybody in that book dies. Like Rogue One. Rogue One, by the way, love that movie.
Yeah.
I thought it was phenomenal. It's probably my favorite.
Hmm.
But when they told me that, I was like, okay, well, obviously I can't kill off Mace.
Right.
Because he's going to be in the next movie. So I had a long talk with Shelley about this, who was Shelley Shapiro was kind of the guiding force in New York to go along with Sue Rossany in California. And I had a long talk with her about this, and was telling her that I just really had no idea what I was going to do. And we went back and forth for a couple hours on the phone. And then I said, well, what if I were to do something like Apocalypse Now with Jedi in it?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, that might work. I'll run that up the chain. And then there's Shatterpoint. Now, Shatterpoint, that's how I sold it to them, but it's not actually based on Apocalypse Now.
No, but I feel like based on, what I know about your Kane series and what you did from a sort of psychological, I was going to say thriller, but perspective for Sith, and Shatterpoint starts introducing that kind of tone for a Star Wars novel, which is a bit darker than your sort of the bubblegum side of some of the stories that were especially happening in the EU, because the EU at that time, there was all kinds of stories, and some made no sense and some were all over the place. But your Shatterpoint was sort of that. There's some pretty, I would say, dark sort of undertones of that.
There's some dark stuff in there.
Yeah.
Part of that was due to what they had already established for Mace, his kind of backstory and stuff like that from the Star Wars comics.
Right.
I think the ones that I used as my main source were John Ostrander's comics of the Clone Wars stuff. Been not by any coincidence at all. He's one of my favorite comics writers. His series Grimjack was one of my favorites. I collected the entire run. So there was some the idea that Mace treads closely to the dark side. Was kind of inspired by, I think, some of Ostrander's take on him. And that's also where he got the name for his fighting style and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure. And the act dogs and at least a reference to the Grassers.
Okay. Yeah. And then you brought that into Revenge of the Sith. There's
a little bit. Well, I had a long talk with Mr. Lucas out at Skywalker Ranch about Revenge of the Sith, and I asked him a lot of questions. We spent a lot of time talking about Jedi and how he wanted the book to feel and stuff like that. And in those days there was none of this kind of canon wars stuff that came about later on.
Right.
It was all canon. Everything published was canon. And so I thought, well, the reason they hired me to write Revenge of the Sith was because of Shatterpoint. They thought I might have the right, be able to strike the tone they were looking for. for the kind of Greek tragedy finale as they had conceived it at the time for the series. And so I thought, well, I've already written 2 books in the EU. Why not draw on the EU to kind of expand and inform the context of the story?
That's great. Yeah, I mean, and it comes to life, and it's funny because I hadn't made the connection until going back and preparing to speak with you. And I mean, even it comes crystal clear in the scene where Mace goes to arrest Palpatine. I feel like there's some real direct connection right at that point, because I mean, that's of course Mace's last stand, and sort of bring that together and to bring it in subtly like you did, I thought was really good. So let's jump into Revenge of the Sith, because that you had said that you had spent some time with George, and before we got on, you had said that you felt a certain sort of I don't want to say pressure, but a certain sort of responsibility in writing this book, keeping in mind at the time, right? I mean, it was a time where everybody thought that was the last Star Wars we were going to get ever. That was it. We didn't. I mean, there wasn't even really a vision or an understanding of what books might come afterwards. It was kind of that. This is it, and you were writing the novelization of it, the end of the Star Wars saga. So talk to me about that responsibility and going into writing that book.
Well, I took it very seriously. You know, it's, as I mentioned, I was a lifelong fan. Well, from the age of 15, I literally saw A New Hope 20 times in the theater. Probably saw Empire 25 or more. By the time that came out, I was in college, and it ran for a couple of years in Des Moines, where I went to school. And so on Tuesday nights, if there wasn't anything better to do, you know, $2, you could go see Revenge of the Sith again in 70 millimeters. So, all right. And I was also, from having worked in the EU, I was kind of deeply concerned about doing something that producing a version of the story that would do justice to how important the story had become to so many millions of people around the world. At the time, we were talking about it. I was thinking about it as sort of the keystone in the arch of Star Wars, because it was, because it's in the middle, right? It's a top. It's the finishing piece in a classic arch. And I thought I put myself under a lot of pressure. Let me put it this way. I really, really wanted to extend everything in my power to make it something memorable, something worthy of how deeply people felt about this story.
Yeah. And so it's not a traditional adaptation, if you will, of a movie. It seems so how did you approach it, and tell me a little bit about working with George on it? At what point in the story did you get involved, and how much of the film was finished as you were putting it together? Because it came out before the movie came out, if I recall.
Yeah, all of the film was finished, but there were some reshoots done while I was working on the book. I used Mr. Lucas's final shooting script as my outline.
Okay.
His final shooting script is not, I would say, it's not point by point reflected in the finished film. He made a lot of changes and de-emphasized a lot of things that were that seemed more important in the script, and he moved things around and changed some plot points, and which required a lot of scrambling on my part. But we got it done. Yeah, I can't. I had something. I had something specifically on that subject to relate, but
That's all right. If it comes
there,
back,
the point is
yeah,
that I was working from the script,
right.
but the movie was not finished enough. I saw some of the like unfinished special effects shots and stuff like that when I was out at Skywalker,
Okay.
but the movie was not finished enough for me to actually watch it before I wrote the book, which is why, as some people have pointed out, the book is significantly light on the actual details of what things look like.
Right.
Because I thought that my best plan for writing this book was to let the movie be the movie,
Right.
and do something with the book that only books can do, which is put you inside the characters.
Right. Right. And I think that that's why it's so well regarded, because you get in Anakin's head. You get in. It's funny. I was saying before that I went back and I reread a piece of it. I honestly I had not read the novel until we finally get to a point like an author named Michael Chen, Mike Chen, who
Mhm.
wrote in From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back. He was a guest on mine a couple
Mhm.
months ago. And he wrote a piece called Disturbance, and he said you have to read this. If you haven't read it, go read it. And I read it, and when I came back and looked at, just the opening sort of description of Obi-Wan Kenobi, to me just hit home. It was a perfect description of what that character
Well, Obi-Wan's my favorite, as some people have pointed out, have suspected.
So was it maybe tell me. I've actually had read somewhere that Obi-Wan was your favorite character. Was there pressure to build that character, especially because, as you said, when you were 15, we didn't know the Anakin story until the 90s, right? I mean,
Right.
we heard the
Mhm.
name, but we didn't know the Anakin story. But growing up as a fan of Obi-Wan, was there a specific or a special sort of pressure on building him just right, or maybe how did you go into in
No, that
addition?
was entirely my, um, not entirely my. It was my interpretation of what I thought Mr. Lucas was going for.
Mhm.
That Obi-Wan was the necessary component in uh, in both, in the survival of the Jedi at all,
Right.
right? And then in the eventual fall of the Emperor,
Mm.
because it was his influence on, in my opinion, his influence on Anakin that kept that spark of goodness alive that Luke sensed.
Mm.
I don't know if that was Mr. Lucas's interpretation or not, but I think that given the what you might call the documentary record that we
Right.
see in films, I think it's a plausible narrative choice.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I also feel like the description of just even right at the outset, right? He's a brilliant fighter who'd rather negotiate. He's those sort of things. I think.
Well, Lucas called him in the actual story. His nickname. They call him the Negotiator.
Mm. Yeah, and it makes and they yeah. Now, so when you saw, well, I'll come back to that. Did George give you any feedback, any comments specifically on the book? Because again, you did such a
Oh
really.
yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah. He actually, now I could be wrong about this because I did not interact with him specifically
Hmm.
after our meeting.
Hmm.
But I got a line edit on my manuscript. I should say the manuscript because it's kind of our manuscript, right?
Hmm.
Um, I got a line edit that I was told by the powers that be at Lucasfilm Licensing was done personally by Mr. Lucas.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, and he or whoever, I'm again, like I said, I was told it was him.
Right.
He literally took out individual words that he didn't think were appropriate, and there are places where for example, you will find actual dialogue from the movie
Right.
in the book, that's because he put it in there.
Okay.
I asked him flat out in our meeting if he wanted me to use the dialogue from the film,
Mm-hmm.
and he told me flat out, "Do whatever you want, just make it good."
Nope.
So
That's a good
that's
direction.
exactly what I did. and there are places where he wanted his words,
Mhm.
and so there they are.
I see. It's now, but you were still able to maintain the great concepts that are the psyche of Anakin Skywalker. I feel like one of my favorite parts is when he turns to Anakin or to Vader, and that moment when he gets that, and it's the defeat of the Sun Dragon. Where did the Sun Dragon concept come from?
Well, I'm not sure I can give you too much in detail because some of this is probably still covered by the confidentiality agreement that I signed before I could have a conversation with him.
Okay.
But I can tell you that the dragon, the Sun Dragon, was originally, for me, it was kind of a running motif, a metaphor for Anakin's rage that drove him to the dark side. And Mr. Lucas didn't like it. He said he said it that he felt that made it sound like the dark side was something outside of Anakin that was working on him.
Okay.
Right? And I got this news, 3 or 4 days before the book was supposed to go to press. Not press, but go to final typesetting.
Yeah.
And I blew a gasket because it was a running, it's a motif. I mean, it occurs again and again and again throughout the book. And if you ever have, Howard Rothman or Shelley Shapiro on your show, they can probably give you more details about that conversation than I can, because I was a little bit out of my head at the time.
I imagine.
But I kept saying, how do you expect me to fix this? What do you think is going to happen? You think I'm just going to go to sleep tonight? I'm going to wake up in the morning and have some brilliant idea that's going to actually make this work? And as I recall, Howard Rothman kept saying, "Well, we have complete faith in your ability." He said, "So just fix it. We trust you." And believe it or not, I woke up at about 4:30 the next morning with the idea of using the dragon as a metaphor for not for the rage, but for the fear.
Okay.
And it was the concept of the dead star,
right,
that came to me in the middle of the night, and I wrote back in the morning and said, "Oh, I think I got it. I think I got it. I think he's gonna like it."
I love the idea that you were just like, what do you think? I'm just going to wake up in the morning and have it? And you woke up in the morning.
It was literally like something out of a cheesy movie.
Yeah.
It literally was, because that's what I kept saying. It's not. I'm like, it doesn't work that way, and they kept saying, "We have complete faith in your ability."
Well, now I need to ask you: are you aware that the Sun Dragon comes back in Mike's Disturbance story?
I was not.
Oh, it's so great. I want to just read this to you because Mike is really a fantastic author, and what he wrote. So the Disturbance story it's in from a certain point of view. It's when the Emperor is getting a sense of it's just before he meets Vader on the hologram that we all saw in Empire. And so he wrote in here that the Force surged, something gathering defenses around the disturbance, pushing all who dared approach away, but Palpatine fought back, clawing his way to the eye of the storm step by step. The current retaliated, shielding itself like a sun dragon, guarding its treasures with all the might of an exploding star. So your sun dragon is back and it's canon.
That's very cool.
Yeah, and it's one of those little Easter eggs that was so nice to see come back.
Well, it's one of the great things about working in Star Wars is the ability to do callbacks.
Right.
Right? Because there are things in several of my books, but especially in Revenge of the Sith, that are callbacks to stuff that I liked from the EU.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the EU a little bit. As when Disney purchased the Lucasfilm, and many of all the stories were sort of put into this legends category, including Revenge of the Sith. How did you respond as an author? I had Kevin J. Anderson on not too long ago, and he had a perspective on it as well. But I'm curious about how did you react to it?
Well,
well,
I'm trying to be clear about this. I wasn't happy about it, but I also was not surprised, nor was I, how would I put it, personally offended.
Right.
I wasn't at all. It was when you do work for hire, which is what my Star Wars books are. It's I have written in other interviews that it's kind of like when you're a kid going over to your friend's house and he lets you play with his Legos, and you make something amazing out of his Legos. But at the end of the day, they're still his Legos. He gets to take them apart and put them back together in any way that suits him, because they're his, not yours.
That's a great way to put it.
That's what Star Wars is for me. It was a fabulous toy box that I got to play in 4 different times and do 4 different things in. And the fact that they decided they wanted to take those things apart and make something new out of it, it's completely their right, and I don't begrudge it to them, because for me, the important part was that I got to play.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Now, if you had you had said at one point in an interview I read that you would love the opportunity to, or if you were to write another Star Wars story, you would like to dig into the last great adventure of the core 3. Is that something that
right? But that was decades ago. That was before there was a sequel trilogy.
Right.
And I would have, but I thought they did it pretty well in the sequel trilogy. I mean, I'm not an unreserved fan of all of the choices that were made in the sequel trilogy, but I thought they did reasonable justice to all of the big 3, and thank God, also to Lando and Chewie.
Yeah, they didn't drop a moon on him like they did.
Right. Yeah, that was not Bob's fault.
No. Where did that come from? Do you know?
I don't know what the actual story was. Again, I may be violating a confidentiality agreement here, but my understanding is that was that Del Rey had gone to LFL and said, well, we want to have a major character death to kick off the NJO, just to make people understand how severe the stakes are this time.
Yeah.
And and I'm fairly sure, I'm not positive again. I don't have this from primary sources,
Okay.
but I'm fairly sure that they basically told Bob Salvatore, it's Chewie.
You got to take out Chewie.
Right. So and he got, again, as far as I know, there was a massive shitstorm about that in fandom.
Oh yeah.
People were very upset with him. I thought it was kind of cool. I mean, if you're going to take out one of the iconic characters, that is a pretty awesome way to go.
Drop a moon on him.
A moon on him. But not only dropped a moon on him, but had him, if I recall correctly, standing up and howling defiance.
Right. Like he was going to stop it.
Right.
Yeah. That's great.
I mean, that's, if you talk about an epic send-off.
Right. That's the way to go, right? That's the way I want to go. Drop a moon on me.
Well, they actually they pulled that in Infinity War.
But which would they
didn't they drop a moon on the Iron Man in Infinity War?
I honestly, I've not.
Or an asteroid or something.
Yeah, right. It was so good in Star Wars. We're gonna do it in.
Well, I don't know. I'm not saying that that's where they got the idea.
Right.
I'm just saying that a cool thing to do is a cool thing to do. I mean, I the first time I came across that was in that sort of trope was in the Lensman books.
Okay.
If are you hip to Doc Smith?
Yeah, a little bit. Yep.
Lensman? Okay, the pulp stuff from the 30s.
Yep.
The 30s through the 50s. But a lot of the books revolved around this sort of escalating arms race between the good guys and the bad guys. And one of the things that the good guys did is smashed the home planet of the bad guys between two other planets.
Yeah, that's something that I love about science fiction and fantasy is just how epic you can go.
Yep.
When we put an end to something, we're going all in, right?
Well, yeah, and one of the really the amazing thing about Star Wars was it was kind of the first time where somebody put on screen like starship battles that you could buy into, that you could believe in and care about what happens.
Yeah, it wasn't the floating things on a string. It wasn't the super shiny ships. They looked so So
it wasn't the Enterprise, with the shield, kind of hanging there on a black screen and shields flaring a little bit when the
it was
the technology wasn't there until the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And it was awesome.
Yeah, which again, the reason it sucked you in at 15 years old, it looked
so real.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched part of it. I have Disney Plus on my TV. I watched the opening of A New Hope just the other night.
Yeah.
And on an HD TV, you can see the effects, but for kids in 1977, it was jaw-dropping.
Yeah. So, and speaking of Disney, and we went there a little bit, and you said that you felt that there were some positives and some challenges to the sequels. As a storyteller and as a fan, how do you feel about the way the conclusion of the stories and or some of the content that we've seen from Disney, again, as a fan and as a storyteller?
Well, I would have to say that Rogue One is arguably my favorite Star Wars film.
Mm.
Arguably, I mean, it's basically tied with Empire, and then The Last Jedi might sneak in there as well. I thought The Last Jedi was exceptional. I know that there are a lot of people who were upset with it. I thought it was great.
Yep. Yeah.
There were just in Rise of Skywalker, there were storytelling choices that didn't work for me.
Right.
That's really about as much as I can say about that, because I honestly, I do not, I have a policy against dissing people's creative work, regardless of whether or not it works for me. And so that's about as far as I'll go.
That's great.
There are things I wish they had done differently. Whatever.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who love that movie. So
yeah. No, and I think that that's a definitely a fair place to go when you find something that you're, just because you don't love it, or if it doesn't work 100% for you, there's no reason to rain on somebody else's parade.
Right.
And I imagine some of it comes from the fact that you're a creator yourself, and
right.
you
and
know the
there
process.
are a lot of people who really disliked my Star Wars books. A lot of people. Trust me, I heard from them.
Right there.
Even when Traitor came out, even one of my staunchest defenders in the kind of online blogosphere said that he thought it was a great novel, but not a good Star Wars novel. It's like, it's just, it's a Stover novel. It's not a Star Wars novel. And I'll take it. Anybody who wants to say one of my books is great is okay with me, regardless of what other caveats are thrown in.
That's true. Yeah. And I think, I talk about Shatterpoint, and I talked about Revenge of the Sith, and I feel like there's a definite style. There's a certain, I think that's what's great about Star Wars. And I think one of the things that I'm excited about with where Disney hopefully is going is this ability to tell Star Wars stories in different ways and in different styles, and to have
I agree.
your style, because I've spoken to you, I've met you, I've known you for 47 minutes now, and I feel like I can tell you your stuff has a much darker, almost there's a violence in Revenge of the Sith, for example, that doesn't appear in most of your Star Wars novels, but it works, right? I mean, it's not violence for violence sake, it's violence because it brings the story, it's what was going on in the story,
right.
And to your point,
because it's a tragic story. It's supposed to hurt a little bit.
Yeah. I think, what did you say? You said that you wanted to. There's two different types of love that Anakin felt, right? For Padme, it was the selfish love, and the what was the other way that you put it?
I don't remember.
Yeah, but and he was definitely suffering from that selfishness,
right?
And
absolutely.
And I think that's why, somebody had said earlier in the chat that your story elevated the story for them, and I think that's what a good novelization of a film does, is it gives you what you don't see on screen.
Right. Well, that was exactly my plan. I wasn't trying to elevate the story. I was trying to illuminate the story. I was trying to add a dimension to what you were going to see on the screen.
Yeah. So was there any you were referencing non-disclosure, so I'm sure that there's not much you can talk about that you wanted to do that didn't make it into the book, but it was thank you for illuminating the Sun Dragon. But was there was there anything in the story, that any direction you wanted to go that that you were kind of held back on, or was it
in Revenge of the Sith?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
No. Okay.
No, they basically, the kind of deal that I made with Del Rey and LFL and with Mr. Lucas personally was that I was going to take his story and tell it as best as I possibly could. There was never really even an inclination on my part to inject my own stories into that. About the only thing I think I did that is not specifically referenced in the script, that is, I had a sort of one of those kind of internal interludes about Mace, where he sort of comes to the realization that he suffers from the same flaw that Anakin does, which is, attachment. But Mace's attachment is to the Republic. Right? That's his love. That's what he can't bear to give up. And that's what induces him to do the, arguably foolish move of trying to arrest Palpatine with only 3 other Jedi.
Right. And then making the decision that he had to execute him.
Yeah.
Which was, yeah. And I think there's some subtlety. And again, I'm glad it's interesting to hear you say that there were only a handful of places where Mr. Lucas wanted to use his specific language, because I think there's ways that feel better in this story to the reminder of again, I just because I reread it today, is the reminder when Mace says to Anakin that we can talk about the decision to kill somebody at that moment later, right? And that was very, very much he was in that moment.
Yeah,
and definitely understood that. And again, I think kudos to connecting it back to Shatterpoint, where he was there. Now, there's the phrase Shatterpoint shows up in both Revenge of the Sith and of course in Shatterpoint, and it seems to be a
and it was used later in the EU as well. There were a couple of other characters who developed the ability to exploit Shatterpoints.
Yeah, and it's a concept that it feels very it's an original introduction into Star Wars. Is that sort of a perspective that you brought in, and how did you arrive at that? Is because that's sort of that breaking point, that critical moment for Mace and for Anakin, for even Palpatine to a degree.
Well, I can tell you. I can tell you exactly where the Shatterpoint came from, the idea.
Yeah.
I had one main one main challenge in writing an entire book about Mace Windu, which was that I felt like there needed to be something particularly special about him to explain the fact that he is the youngest Jedi Master in history. I mean, if I recall correctly, I could be wrong on the actual details, but I'm pretty sure that he is on the Jedi Council at about the age of 40.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Right. Yep. And so, at the age of 40, he is a peer of Yoda, who's 900. Okay. So I'm thinking there has to be something really extraordinary about his abilities and his insight, not just fighting, but his insight into the kind of problems that Jedi face, which are often too complex to be solved with a lightsaber.
Right.
And my clue for this was the final, not the final, but the fight scene, the big battle scene in the arena on Geonosis in Attack of the Clones.
Right.
Where Mace finds himself facing off with Jango Fett, who earlier in that same film, we saw him beat Obi-Wan like a rented mule.
Yep.
And Mace kills him almost without even looking at him.
Yes. Yep.
He lands, he takes aim, Mace backhands his lightsaber and takes his head off.
Right.
And I thought, how do you do that? How do you almost casually take out somebody who beat the crap out of Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Right.
I mean, it wasn't an epic battle. It just kind of did it.
Yep.
Boom. And I thought, okay, well, what if that's his particular force power is the ability to see the weakness in things and exploit it.
That's great.
And I probably stole that from Marvel Comics. I seem to recall that there was a character in the kind of the Fantastic Four, the Inhumans.
Mm-hmm.
One of the Inhumans. I'm fairly certain Karnak. That was his ability. Was he was a martial artist who could sense weakness. Yeah, that's probably where I stole it from, but not consciously. This is something that
right.
Thinking about it later on, I was like, yeah, that's probably where I got it.
But I mean, it makes sense, and because it's funny. It's funny you say that because I was just literally the other day having a conversation with somebody about how did Mace Windu just destroy this amazing
this super commando.
Yeah.
Super commando wearing Mandalorian armor that's resistant to lightsabers.
Right, and he just found the spot and
just
quick
found the spot and uncorked him like a pop top.
It's fantastic. That's great. It makes a lot of sense, and it's cool to know that backstory. And again, that's that sort of that level of thinking that you can put into a book that you can't necessarily put into a film. And it's hopefully the kind of thinking that we're seeing in. Did you watch much of the Clone Wars animated series, or have you followed?
I sampled it. I saw some of it, and I saw some of Rebels. The animation stuff doesn't work for me as well as the live action stuff.
Yeah. Are you a fan of The Mandalorian?
I liked it.
Yeah.
I liked it. I liked season 2 better than season 1. I thought it was pretty strong, actually. And I like they have a really impressive sort of ensemble of guest stars and their recurring characters and stuff like that. It was great seeing all these people.
Yeah, and it's I think part of the reason I like it is because of what you're saying. I mean, they can build that story over 8 hours versus trying to
yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. I thought they did it well. I thought the sort of emotional arc of Mando, leading up to the well, I'm not even going to say because I don't believe in spoilers because there may be some people who haven't seen it yet.
Right.
But his emotional arc, I thought, was handled really, really well.
Yeah. It's an amazing, even from an ensemble cast, because there's so many people that go into bringing the Mandalorian to life as a character, the voice, the look. It's just so well done. So well done.
I agree.
Well, Matthew, I have a section of the show here, the 10 questions section, where I'm going to ask you 10 questions. It's sort of like, have you seen the Inside the Actors Studio with
I've seen a few of them.
Okay. Well, there's a 10 question segment. And so I'm going to ask you 10 questions. You can expand on the answer as much as you like, or give a short answer. Nobody will, well, I won't judge you, but some people listening might. So let me the 10 question.
Get ready.
Okay. For what?
Okay, that's a little over the top, but that's okay. So the first question is, what is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
Well,
this is where I think over answer.
I think I answered that. I think it's.
You did.
I probably gotta kind of go with Rogue One.
Yeah. And what was it? I mean, it was one of those movies that, we knew the story. We saw the opening crawl of A New Hope, but what we got from it was so great. What was it about it that you liked so much?
Well, you basically knew going in that it was kind of a last stand against desperate odds, and I knew going in, what the premise was, and I thought that I just thought that they managed the kind of they managed to escalate the action, continue to raise the stakes, and all the performances I thought were excellent. Yeah. And the climax was just tremendous. And and then at the end, it's kind of, in some ways, there's a little echo of Revenge of the Sith, because it ends in devastating tragedy, right. But also at the end there's the little twist where they're turning the dial over toward hope for the future.
Yeah. And there's a pure,
and it also fills one of the main plot complaints that Star Wars nitpickers have always had with the original film.
The unshielded.
Why would they have an unshielded exhaust port that leads directly to the main reactor?
I have to say, I just discovered the Star Wars on Trial project that you were a part of.
Oh yeah.
And I have to recommend that to folks to go check out. It's really, it was great. You and David Brin. Put this together, and it's
David Brin is a much more high-powered writer and thinker than I am. So I chose to not engage him on his home turf in that book, but instead kind of ruthlessly mock him, which may or may not have been a good strategy, but
it's the strategy I pick. If I can't outsmart somebody, I'll just mock them, and I'll be
right. Because what else can you do?
That's right.
What else can you do? If I had attempted to engage his arguments directly,
right,
he would have slaughterized me.
But it's a great project, so I recommend anybody who's a Star Wars fan to go and check that out as well, because it's a kind of a at times it feels so much self-aware, but it's it's a back and forth argument on.
Well, it was tremendously fun to do. I will tell you that.
I imagine, and it was re-released with Force Awakens as well, right? So.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was actually the version that I just found it. And
okay.
So I think you'd like it. You should check it out. The second question is, if you could live on any Star Wars planet, where would you call
home? Well, probably Coruscant, because I'm a city boy. I mean, and if you're on Coruscant, you can catch a ship to any part of the galaxy in a couple hours, apparently. I mean, Palpatine gets from Coruscant to Mustafar in apparently minutes.
Yeah, right.
So, I don't know.
As soon as he gets that Force call, he's like, "Oh, right. I better get over there."
oh, Anakin's in trouble. Well, I'm gonna go.
That's funny. Again, another great thing in the Star Wars on Trial is because, right? Or is that? Or no, I think your answer was shut up. When people were thinking too much about the physics of Star Wars, it's because it's fun. It's because it's Star Wars.
Right.
Yes, that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves as a Star Wars content creator is the actuallys, because it's Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, when I was working, first got the contract for Revenge of the Sith, and was heading out to Skywalker to talk with Mr. Lucas. I had dinner with Shelley and Howard, and I said, there's some things in the script that I think are a little strange, like the ship rolling in orbit and everybody sliding down the decks, and I'm like, physics doesn't work that way. They're in orbit, they're in free fall. If they're on the deck at all, it's because there's artificial gravity. So if the ship rolls, it doesn't really affect you.
Right.
You don't go falling onto the ceiling.
Right.
And the response I got was, maybe, but George loves that stuff.
Yeah.
He said that's what makes the movies fun. And I said, okay, well, I'll work with it.
That's great. Yeah. Nope. It is. It really is the fact that you can hear explosions. The fact there are explosions in space. It's just
Right.
it's just Star Wars. Have fun with it, which is
Right.
I think sometimes we forget that. And I think it's interesting because again, you saw it when you were 15. I saw it when I was 7. My children, I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and if you start asking those questions, you're gonna nobody asked that about the Wizard of Oz, right? How did a house landed and she didn't hit the ceiling and break her neck?
Right.
And it's just
Right.
fun. Let's have some fun. So, all right, cool. Question number 3: would you consider yourself a rebel or an Imperial?
Oh, I'm definitely a rebel.
Yeah.
I am not a conspicuously good citizen or a conservative fascist or anything like that. I'm not. I am a committed anti-authoritarian, as I think you can see in all of my published work.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was a softball, I think, for you.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's okay. And it's hard to even say Imperial just because I mean they do have better uniforms. There's no doubt about
Well,
that.
yeah, but the Nazis had great uniforms. Hugo Boss did the SS uniforms, but
didn't make it right just because they dressed well.
Their fashion is no excuse for genocide.
That's the quote from the show. That's it. Fashion is no excuse for genocide. That's great. All right. Next question is what's your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
Oh, it's a lightsaber, of course.
Yeah.
The lightsaber ignition.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that's one of those things from seeing it the first time. Just how are they doing that? I remember that's what I walked out with. How do they do that? So
yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Who or what? And okay, you wrote the books. Is it who or what is your favorite droid? How would you ask that? For this before you answer the question, how do you? Okay,
it depends on who you ask. There have been droid centric books.
Mm-hmm.
I am ashamed to say that I cannot remember the actual designation of the droid, but my favorite is the one that Alan Tudyk played in Rogue One.
K2SO. Yep.
K2S. I thought it was K2SO.
Yep.
But then I was thinking, I kept wanting to say H2SO, which is like sulfuric acid.
Yeah.
Yeah. K2SO. Yes, he's my favorite droid.
Excellent. That's a good call. Now, do you refer to them as who's or what's as a
generally who?
Okay. Yeah. I think, and that's again
they're not all self-aware,
mm-hmm.
but it's clear that K2SO is, and C3PO and R2D2 definitely are, and BB-8, for sure. A lot of them clearly aren't.
Yeah,
but whatever. I also kind of liked. I like what is it? IG-11.
Yes.
Waititi. Assassin droid. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
He's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was one of those situations, again, a classic Star Wars thing that it makes you laugh. Seeing a droid that can make you laugh works for me. And it's funny you say K2 with K2. Two of my favorite characters from the Disney era of Star Wars have come from Rogue One, because Orson Krennic is one of my favorite characters as well. I don't know, but all right, cool. So the next question is, if you could own any spaceship or vehicle in the Star Wars universe, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. I kind of liked Padme's ship from Revenge of the Sith. I thought that was very cool. Yeah. I mean, everybody wants the Falcon.
Yeah. So much so that I'm considering, as my 100th episode, taking the option of the Falcon off the table.
Right. Yeah, but I kind of like. I'm kind of a sports car guy.
Yeah.
And that kind of sleek, shiny, obviously super fast, and also apparently luxurious.
Yeah.
And big enough for Obi-Wan to stow away on. It sounds like that's a way to travel in style.
I would definitely agree with that. It's a good way to go. All right. What of all the Star Wars collectibles that you may have, I'm assuming you have one or two. What's your favorite? And it doesn't have to be something you can buy. If it's something maybe that's personal to you, what's your favorite Star Wars?
Well, probably my favorite. It's not actually a collectible, but when I was on tour for Revenge of the Sith, I got a couple of plaques. I'm an honorary member of the 501st Stormtrooper Division Battalion, the 501. I'm an honorary member of the 501 and of the Rebel Legion.
Oh, that's great.
And those two, they're the two plaques declaring me honorary members of those. Those are my favorites.
That's great. Yeah, those are, and they do just such great work. They're so the charitable work is fantastic, and that's great. That's a cool thing to have. If you could be any Star Wars character, you've written for many of them. Who would it be, and why?
I would say, most likely, I would end up as somebody like Mace, because Mace has a lot in common with the main character of my own series, Kane. It's kind of like the light side version. Kane is the dark side version, you might say.
Yeah.
But in terms of actual fun, I might actually go with a character from Shatterpoint who also shows up in Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor, which is Nick Rostu. Because I like his attitude. He is kind of irrepressibly upbeat, and everybody underestimates him. He's smarter than they think he is, and he is also, when he's pushed, can be significantly deadly. And I just think that's kind of cool. The guy that everybody thinks is a clown, who can totally take you out if you push him too far.
That's great. I'd like to maybe there's a chance we can see some version of him in The Mandalorian or something. I think that might be kind of
would be awesome.
Because they are doing, they're pulling in these EU characters. Well,
there is a reason why Nick shows up in Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor.
Why is that?
I heard a rumor that they were thinking about killing him off during the Clone Wars. And I was like, oh, no. Not Nick.
I'm going to make it so he lived through that.
I'm going to make it so he lived through that. Now, he comes out of it with scars, and he's older and sadder and wiser.
Sure.
But yeah, I was like, oh, no. Don't you be killing my guy. Again, this is a story I can't verify is absolutely true, but I'm fairly certain it is, that after Bob Salvatore briefly left Wizards, he stopped writing Drizzt for a little while. They had hired somebody else to continue the character, and they had killed him off. And when I don't know if it probably wasn't Wizards in those days, probably was still TSR, but they came back to Bob and said, "You want to write for us again?" And he said, "Sure, I'll do more Drizzt novels." And they're like, "No, we killed him." And he said, "No, we didn't. Not if you want me to write for you." Again, I can't verify that's actually true, but that was the story that I heard.
It's a great story either way. That's great. I love your attitude. I'll make it so you can't slice that story. I'm gonna connect it for you. It's great. So all right. So question number 9 is, what is your favorite Star Wars moment?
There are two, and they're both from the original trilogy.
Okay.
We're talking movies now. I don't want to go into the books because there's a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure.
One is the first scene in Obi-Wan's house on Tatooine, where he gives Luke the lightsaber, and the John Williams theme, the Tales of the Jedi theme, comes up for the first time. That kind of rocks my world even today. And the other was at the climax of Empire Strikes Back, when you see Vader going almost too easy. He flips the switch on the carbonite freezer, and behind him you just see the streak of Luke coming up out of the pit, out of the carbonite pit. And I will tell you, I saw that movie opening night in whatever it was, 1980, when it came out in Champaign-Urbana, packed house. People cheered when the villains, the heroes showed up and booed and hissed the villains. But I will tell you that when Luke came streaking up out of the carbonite pit, the entire theater just went apeshit, just went up for grabs. People jumped out of their seats shouting. It was awesome.
Yeah, and I talk a lot about with guests and friends about how that was the thing about Empire Strikes Back, was much like you said, we had no idea what to expect with Star Wars. We had expectations for Empire, and so suddenly that story, I think that's some of the reason why the story hits a little bit different for different people. It's my favorite, and just because there was that, and that, the crowd cheered because not just because the Death Star,
because we didn't know Jedi, we didn't know he could do that.
Right. And that's a whole conversation for another time about, when people have issue with the sequels from a Force user perspective. If you go back and you look at Empire Strikes Back and Luke grabbing the lightsaber with the Force for the first time
in the Wampa cave, right?
And the Force ghost concept, like today's internet would have ripped that movie apart. Yeah.
Well, the movie was not very well received when it was released.
Right.
Didn't get really good reviews, and as I recall, was kind of a disappointment at the box office as compared to the original. And of course now it's iconic. It's one of the probably 4 greatest movie sequels ever made. And there's Empire, there's Godfather Part 2, right? Terminator 2, and Aliens.
Yes. Yeah. I can't
disagree with it. That's the list.
That's it. Right. Jaws 2 doesn't make that list. I'm sorry. Matrix 2 doesn't make that list. There's so many that could have been, but Jaws shouldn't have been. But that's a different podcast conversation. But yes, you're right. I mean, Empire, Godfather 2, Aliens, and Terminator 2, they're movies that rare time where, and given some time, because as you said, Empire wasn't necessarily received positively off the bat, it certainly has grown to become better and bigger than the original. So and the final question is, what is your go-to Star Wars quote?
My go-to Star Wars quote. Probably the one that I use the most often is also one that gets a lot of crap from people online, but is legitimately in line with the kind of Taoist underpinnings of the Force. Is try not, do or do not. There is no try.
And why does it get such a hard time online? Do you think just because people don't dig into
it? I think they misunderstand the concept. the concept being what the actual quote is talking about is a commitment to your action, right? Saying, don't make an attempt.
Right.
Do what you intend to do. If it fails, okay.
Right.
But you're not just trying something, you're doing something.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of the interpretation of the word try, I think. Right. Right.
Is where a lot of people, and that's the other one is that I have been known to use is that is where you fail.
Yeah, that's great. I find that as a parent of an 8-year-old and 11-year-old, I refer to Yoda a lot more than I
oh yeah
probably would have expected to. But well, Matthew, thank you so much. I've taken an hour and 20 minutes of your time. I really appreciate
it's been a pleasure
hanging out with you and getting to know a little bit more about what went into, again, what is a classic Star Wars novel. And I said before we got on that I was not always 100% sure that I was going to be talking to the real Matthew Stover because I couldn't find you on social. So tell me a little bit about where we can find you and if you.
Well, I'm on Facebook intermittently. Most people who try to find me are where you found me, which is on Twitter. That's my main social media sort of thing. I don't maintain a blog or anything like that. The thing that I thought was funny about you saying you weren't sure you were actually going to be talking to me is that, for decades after I started selling books, I was maintaining a day job, mostly to cover health insurance, pre Obamacare.
Right.
And one of my last jobs, I was working as an exterminator. I was an Orkin man. Okay. It's an interesting job in a lot of ways.
Sure.
My now ex-wife referred to it as my license to kill. and I'm like, yeah, I take more lives before lunch than James Bond did in his entire career. But what was funny is I had a job at a fairly nice house in the suburbs, and I was there killing their mice and their ants, and I saw that they were huge Star Wars fans, and they had Traitor and Shatterpoint and Revenge of the Sith on their shelf. And I'm like, hey, did you like those? And they're like, yeah. It's like Shatterpoint. That's my favorite Star Wars novel. And I said, oh, that's cool. I wrote that. And he's like, you did not. And I said, yeah, I actually did. And he took the book out of I had my author photo in the back. He took the book out of the bookcase and he opened it up and he looked at it and he goes, that's not you. And I'm like, yeah, sort of it is.
It's fantastic.
Yep.
The guy killing my bugs and mice wrote my favorite Star Wars.
Right.
It's fantastic. Well,
that's
good.
not you.
Well, Matthew, thank you again so much. We can find you on Twitter and we can find you on Facebook. And it's thank you for spending time and for writing such great books that clearly have meant a lot to a lot of people, and that's fantastic.
Been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
All right.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for hanging out. If you had fun, please like, subscribe, and share. If you really liked it, please feel free to head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/BeyondTheBlastDoors. You can also find that link on BeyondTheBlastDoors.com, where you can keep up with this show and all the shows on the Beyond the Blast Doors network, as well as find a link to our merch store. And if you use the code ATGcast, you'll get 10% off your order. So until next time, this has been Pete Fletzer, and we'll see you for our next trip around the galaxy.
Around the Galaxy is copyright 2021 Pete and Seat Studios. Our music is brought to us by the band Silver Colored Knob, whose music can be found on Apple iTunes. Spotify, or wherever you find music.